You are listening to the Mohua show, where it's all about celebrating the Junoon among changemakers and their journey.
Presence does not always mean that he's present.
Studies reveal that children living in fatherless homes are nearly 3 times more likely to engage in drug dealing or carry firearms compared to those living with their fathers, So do you think that there is an underlying reason for this connection, and how can communities really better support these children?
We cannot have this conversation without talking about poverty, because a lot of times fathers are disconnected from families out of shame, and poverty for a lot of times are at the root of a lot of these issues. Healing is a journey, wholeness is a destination, meaning that one, we have to come into some level of understanding that there is a place called wholeness. And the only way to get there is one healing step at a time.
Hi, today we are diving deep into a conversation about trauma, healing, and the power of fatherhood. Yes, you heard me right. Power of Fatherhood with Robert Marshall, a trauma recovery coach, author, and advocate who's breaking the silence around male sexual abuse and fatherlessness. What happens when boys grow up without fathers? How does that absence shape their understanding of masculinity, leadership, and healing? And what can we do as a society to support men who are carrying all these invisible wounds? Robert's story is one of resilience and transformation, and his work centers on helping men reclaim their power through healing, faith, and empowerment. So get ready to hear powerful insights and inspiring truths that could change how we think about trauma and recovery forever. Thank you, Robert, for taking out the time. It's an absolute honor for me to have you here with me. So, Robert, can you start by sharing a bit about your personal story? What led you to become a trauma recovery coach and an author?
Well, growing up, I grew up in a small urban community, very, very poor. I did not grow up with my father. I did not know who he was. And I actually am a survivor of sexual abuse. I've had 9 sexual abusers over my life. Both male and female abuse started for me at 4 years old, all the way up until the age of 18, 19 years old. Grooming, rape, molestation, urban trafficking, and not realizing that until I got maybe in my my mid 20s, that what all of these things were. Where I come from, a lot of people did not grow up with their fathers, so that was normal. And as it relates to sexual abuse, sexual trauma, I grew up always thinking it was my fault, because the abusers always made me feel as if I did something wrong or it was my issue. And so many of them were faith leaders, educators, and well-respected people in the community that were actually causing the harm. And through the manipulation and dark psychological practices, I bore the guilt of that until my late 20s, when I really started doing inside work. From that, I realized that I was not the only one, that what happened to me was not solely my fault, and that I deserved the right to heal. And that process started for me once I got married and I started having my own children. I have 3 children, but I had 2 boys first, and I love my children. But one day, as I'm driving home from work, my background is in higher education, and I'm driving home from work, and all of a sudden I start feeling this feeling towards my boys. They were very small, and it was almost like I was jealous of them, and I could not understand why I was jealous of them. And after doing some work, I realized I was jealous of them because they had the father that I always wanted, but I was never going to have. And so that triggered some things within me, and I realized that I needed to do some deeper inner work. So,
thank you, Robert, for being so vulnerable and open with us. You've also spoken very openly about growing up without a father. How did that experience really shape your understanding of masculinity and trauma? Just to be fatherless, what was it like to understand? Of course, you did say right now that, it's only when you grew up and you were in your 20s, you understood that it's not your fault. But tell us a little bit about masculinity. What does it mean to you?
Man, so right now, I know there are cultural norms depending upon what country we're from and family dynamics. And for me, I did not have a healthy definition of what that looked like. It was very toxic. It was very, my definition of masculinity came from very unhealthy places. It came from the men that abused me. It came from the pornography that I was introduced to and addicted to at an early age. One of my abusers, who happened to be one of my barbers, he cut my hair, and he was watching pornography as he was cutting my hair. And so that initiation into masculinity, into manhood, was very toxic as it relates to thinking that my masculinity, or the worth of my just totality of who I was determined by what I had and what I could do. And that my worth was from the waist down, and not the waist up. And so I have very unhealthy definitions of what it meant to be a man, and feeling the need to continue to prove my worth through educational attainment. I have a doctorate degree, through sexual conquest, through gaining power and prestige in positions in community in our nation, around the world. I've had the opportunity, to rise from a lot of those things, and I attended school at North Park University. Then I was able to attend school at the University of Chester, UK. I was able to study in Africa. I was able to, and was able to do a lot of things, but not realizing the internal thing that was driving me was rejection. Not realizing that I was looking for somebody. With all the things that I achieved, I was screaming, the little boy inside of me was screaming, see me, love me, hear me, respect me. I want to feel seen. I want to feel safe. I want to feel heard. And I thought that I could do that by earning people's love and respect. And I realized that had to come from within. That could not come from someone externally. And I think that's an issue that a lot of men face, that we exude power, we exude, achieving things or sexual conquest with partners. And a lot of us have self-sabotaging behaviors because we cannot, and there's a disconnect between the little boy inside who wants to feel seen, safe, and heard, versus the adult male who is living in a world where he feels rejected, where he feels like he needs to earn, improve love, and doesn't have a healthy definition of what it means to be a man. And so part of my journey has been reclaiming my power and really being able to define what it means to be a man for me in my context and in my world. One of the things about being abused, as someone who's been abused, is that, whether that's sexual abuse, physical abuse, right, that you lose your choice to choose who you desire to be, and you take on the identity of those of the community and those who are abusing you. And so
the perpetrator.
Exactly. And so I started realizing that I had the right to choose to reject those identities, to reject that, and redefine what this means for me.
Amazing, Robert. Robert, studies reveal that children living in fatherless homes are nearly 3 times more likely to engage in drug dealing or carry firearms compared to those living with their fathers, So do you think that there is an underlying reason for this connection, and how can communities really better support these children, and how much of this is really true?
I think this is actually very true. As it relates to, a lot of the global issues, number one, as around, that deals with fatherlessness, that are dealing with boys who are hurting and broken. And also, we cannot have this conversation without talking about global poverty, because a lot of times fathers are disconnected from families out of shame, and poverty for a lot of times are at the root of a lot of these issues. We realize that abuse and trauma, a lot of trauma that is happening in the lives of men, it festers in impoverished places, because men cannot either provide or having hard difficulty with, so they reach for self-sabotaging behaviors. So drugs, alcohol, illicit sexual behavior, violence. They resort to these things as a way to cope and to feel some level of worth, which leaves children at home who are broken and hurting because their father is not there. And this looks drastically different in different countries. You know, we've done research in Latin America, we've done research in Africa and America, and also in some spaces in India. And, you know, sometimes you do, depending upon the country, you still may have the idea or the shell of the father still there, but presence does not always mean that he's present. And so therefore, the mom or the mother or the grandmother have the responsibility of rearing children, and it was never solely meant to be their responsibility. At some age, in every culture, there is this disconnect, and especially for man children or for boy children, in every culture, there is this separate and this rites of passage that typically needs to happen for boys in order to become men. And we see the decline of rites of passage programs, opportunities in this cultural context. It's becoming more rare every day in these spaces. And we also see that the men or these broken boys eventually become broken men. And those broken men become our leaders. They become our politicians. They become our husbands. They become our doctors, our lawyers, our priests, our rabbis, our whatever that space is. And though they physically grow, they are still emotionally dwarfed. And
absolutely,
they hold power and prestige and position. Now they become they can become harmful. They can become dangerous because they're still in these powerful positions when they're still broken little boys inside. And so, yes, you are totally correct. These fester, you know, what I call self-sabotaging behaviors, drug use, gang violence, young men specifically looking for places of affirmation and love. One of the greatest things in one of my greatest missions is to raise awareness about the necessity and the need for every little boy to feel safe, seen, and heard. And there's a certain level of intimacy, healthy intimacy, that is supposed to come from the father, from the grandfather, hugs, kisses, you know, from as a little boy, to help nurture, to help them feel safe, to help them feel seen, to help them feel heard. And when that is not given to the child as a small child, he will then start looking for that in other places.
Absolutely. But that's also for a girl child.
Yes.
You know?
Yes.
Because there is a lot of, in a lot of Asian homes, fathers do not show physical love with their daughters. And, so then that also becomes like that blueprint, right? For you, the blackboard from where you start seeking love in the way that you've seen, your parent or your parents being uncomfortable about expressing love, with a physical hug or holding you close to their chest and making you feel safe. So, what does the healing process look like for men who are trying to become better fathers, but were never fathered themselves, Robert? So you would be the best person to talk about it.
Yeah, it's a journey. So the framework for all the work that I do, and now please hear me, is healing is the journey, wholeness is the destination. I'm going to say that again so you all can write it down. It's healing is the journey, wholeness is the destination. Meaning that, one, we have to come into some level of understanding that there is a place called wholeness. And we have to get there. And the only way to get there is one healing step at a time. One of the first step, number one, is realizing that there is, like, a lot of men or a lot of people, they live in a state of hopelessness. And so when one of the most dangerous men in the world is a man that has no hope. And if there is no hope, there's no drivers, there's no purpose to live. And so he will say anything in order just to numb pain. And so you have to reinstill that hope in him. The first thing is you have to give him the power. He has to take back his power to choose what a working definition of manhood and masculinity is. And I say that because many of us have to learn to accept apologies that we will never get. We grow up in environments where our fathers, our mothers did not have the ability to give us all of needed. Rather, right now we're indifferent. And the truth is, some of our parents, and especially if you grow up in various contexts, they will never admit that. They will never say those things, or even to know them, right? Some of us don't even know our parents, but if you don't, some of them, they're like, you should be grateful that we raised you, and that there is a place of honor. So number one, you have to learn to accept apologies that you will never get. Some people don't have the capacity to do that. They don't have the space to do that. So once you start that process, you realize that forgiveness is not about them. It's about you. Unforgiveness is like drinking poison and waiting for the other person to die. It's not going to happen. The unforgiveness is killing you. So you have to learn to accept these apologies and realize that they gave the best that they had. And that is the starting base. The second thing is you have to realize within yourself, you are enough. You are enough. I say this, and I don't mean to be rude or brash, but men live in an internal comparison contest all the time, comparing themselves. And so you have to, in your journey, your healing journey, you have to learn that within yourself, you are enough without cars, without power, without money, without position, without presence. But that comes from a relationship with you. And I believe that part is divine. Whatever that looks like for you, that part is divine, and you doing the work, because you may not ever get the affirmation. You may not ever get practical, data point on your shoulder, or this is who you are from your father. And especially if you never had it or don't know them. And so you have to begin that journey. The third thing, you realize that you are worthy to give love. You have a capacity to give love and to receive love. A lot of men who grow up without fathers don't think that they are worth love, or that they have a capacity to receive love, or they feel like they have to earn it. And they don't realize they have a capacity to give it as well. And then I also walk with men for them to understand that every man was created. Every man was created for something bigger to do something bigger beyond themselves. You're not in the earth just to live for you. You were created for a purpose, and that purpose, when you find it, I think there's a quote that says there's two of the most important dates in a man's life: the day that he's born and the day he figured out why he was born. And so out of that flows purpose, and also how you perceive yourself. There's a principle that if you view yourself as a grasshopper, the world will see you as such as well. And so learning to build confidence, respect for yourself, and in the purpose that you have, you then begin that journey to becoming a more healthier version of you, not only for you, but for your children as well.
So, Robert, male sexual trauma is a very difficult topic, right? What do you wish more people understood about the impact, of sexual abuse on men? I mean, a lot of men don't even talk about it, women's sexual abuse also is such a taboo, in India. And I don't think all the cases get reported. And male sexual abuse is something I don't know how many people will talk about. So tell me a little bit more, Robert, having been a survivor yourself. I mean, tell me about that.
So I would say the number one part of our research is to prove. We've done some light research in various countries. So here in America, in Latin America, Africa, the UK, and some light spaces in India. Number one, we want to prove and show that 80 to 85% of men in urban communities have experienced some form of sexual abuse, sexual trauma, or have been exposed to sex prematurely. Also, that some research is showing that boys as early as 4 years old are already showing pornography addiction because of...
Repeat that again, Robert. You're saying at the age of 4.
The age of 4, yes. Because, especially in America, every kid, the first thing that a parent does is give them a tablet, to give them an iPad, to give them some type of electronic device where they have access to the internet and the world at their fingertips. And if men or adults, women included, still have issues with controlling their urges and their urges and traumas as adults, when you hand a child at 1-year-old, 2-year-old, an iPad or a tablet, they have the power of the internet at their hand. And sometimes, no matter how, as parents, we try to kind of buffer that, I realized that I have 3 children, that some of the, like when they are playing games on those tablets, there are ads that come up, on those games that are sexual in nature, that spark curiosity, that get children addicted to porn, and they may not even know what it is, but these images, they're introduced to them prematurely, and it's like giving a child a machine gun and thinking that nobody's going to get harmed. And so the statistics that I just shared with you, those are statistics that we've been working on researching on since 2019. We've been working on a documentary. And so number one, why is this a major issue? Because number one, our research shows that most men who experience sex prematurely, or have been sexually abused, or have experienced some type of sexual trauma, number one, they don't realize that it's such until 20 years later, after the initial abuse happened. Now, in America, the issue with that is that for men seeking any level of justice, a lot of times that's beyond what we call the statutes of limitations, meaning that legally, if it's been a certain amount of time, there's nothing that you can do about it. The law won't even allow you to pursue charges. Number two, what does that mean if a boy was introduced to sex prematurely or sexually abused by a woman, right? In a lot of our cultures, it is seen as an introduction into masculinity or manhood. Hey, you have a boy who's 13 years old or 12 years old, 8, 9, 10, or even as a teenager. A lot of times his sexual abuser, if it's a woman, it's not at the hands of someone that the family does not know. It's either only a close family member or someone who has been trusted to care for the child. So we talk to a lot of men. It may be babysitters. I'm so sorry. It may be, I'm so sorry. It may be babysitters. It may be nannies. It may be cousins or aunts or, extended family members who have had access and who have built trust. And a lot of times, there's terminology that my friend, Dr. Kelly Palpy, wrote multiple books on this about grooming the male child. And so not understanding what the grooming process actually looks like. The grooming process, it looks like that individual who has been trusted to care for the child, to the male child, to provide safety. So this can be a coach, this can be a nanny, this can be a family friend, for some it's a priest, or educator. They build trust with not only the child, but also with the family. And so the parents don't suspect anything because this individual is not some stranger that's abducting the kid. They would build trust. There's no reason for you to not believe that your child is safe with them.
Yeah.
And they work hard on creating separation between the parents and the child through the power of secrecy. So Dr. Kelly Palpy starts talking about how the abuser or the groomer, especially with male children, may try to get them by themselves. And maybe as small as, hey, they know that their parents won't allow them to have, if you will, a candy after a certain time. And so the abuser or the groomer will allow the child to have a piece of candy and say, and we'll start off with something like, hey, this is our little secret, just to test them to see if they're going to keep the secret. And so that abuser will feed different things. So it may start, and a groomer or abuser will play the long game, and they will wait in order to pounce. And so it may start with candy. For a teenager, it may be alcohol. It may be pornography. It may be and so what they do is they ensnare the male child into secrecy. If it's a cult, in the media you see sports coaches, they're now, a lot of cases and priests are coming up, or faith leaders, or religious leaders, or spiritual guides. It's coming up that a lot of times, they will use that background to get confessions out of teenagers to spark curiosity. And they may, say things like, "Oh, that's normal. Oh, this is just what boys do. This is just, fun," and allow them to do that there. They may introduce them to forms of masturbation. They may introduce them to forms of porn, or they may give them extra attention, or extra kind of, privilege, if you will, to seem and feel special, so that they can also use that as a tool to groom the child to feel safe. And they are literally ensnared by secrecy. So that's the grooming process. And that happens a lot. And a lot of times, boys, if by the hands of a woman, number one, they don't even see it as such, because and let me know when you win this, because I will totally get out here, but the male anatomy is very different than a woman's body. And a lot of times, if a boy is introduced to sex prematurely or grown by a woman, he will feel as if nothing is wrong with it, even if internally there is some type of discard, if he did not feel comfortable. And they ask themselves internally, well, how can this be an issue when either they had an erection or they ejaculated during the process? And the thing is about how the male body is made, we stimuli, our body responds. And this happens often to young men who don't have a healthy framework for sex, for identity, for sexuality, even for anatomy, and understanding how their body works. And so they are discipled in dysfunction, and so now their relationship with their body, their relationship with sex, and even if they did not like it, they feel like their body has betrayed them. And so there's some levels of disassociation internally, because, how can, my body respond to something that I did not want? And even when they experience some level of pleasure, during the process, right? They feel a certain level of guilt, and they take on that deep rooted shame. Because, and here's the thing, after their body is awakened to sex and to sex, period, then there's an internal issue and dialogue on, why do I want this again? Because now they, once the release of, ejaculation, now the dopamines have gone off, and they've not experienced anything like this with another individual most of the time. And so now there is a natural, almost addiction to what is happening to them, not realizing it is harming them. And for a lot of men who grow older, they don't see this as an issue, because now their choice to choose they want to be has been stripped from them. And we see this more of a problem with boys or men who've been introduced to sex by other men. And so if they've been raped or molested or introduced to the world by men, socially, this is where we may have most cultures will have a problem. So now this is really guarded by secrecy and shame. And even if there's an internal dialogue about this being wrong, they're already ensnared by the groomer, and now they are exposed to this taboo, or to this reality, and they don't feel comfortable to tell anybody. And so the grooming, and even for me, who I was groomed and molested by people who are much older, and it started for me as early as fifth grade. These men, it's for one person, it started in fifth grade, and it went only to 19 years old, because he groomed me into believing that he had the right to my body. He had the right. So whenever he came around, that mentally, and emotionally, even if there was some level of not wanting this interaction, this was the only thing that I knew. And though I may know that it's wrong, am I, culturally, right? Because I have access to this, and there's an internal deficit of, for me, fatherlessness, wanting to feel seen, wanting to feel heard, wanting to feel safe. I'm now getting it through sexual interactions or a form of it. And it's not realizing that it's the very thing that's killing me. And the person has manipulated the individual, the young man, enough for them to believe that the person that is committing the abuse is the only person that cares for them, loves them, has their best interests at heart, and they can't tell anybody else because if they get in trouble or it's their fault, and or that they now are, and I want to be respectful to say it on this platform, that now that they are part of the LGBT plus community, and so this young boy has never had the chance to choose, so he's been forced into an identity that he did not choose for himself. It was chosen for him.
This is a very big thing that you said just now, Robert.
Wow.
This is massive what you said, that sometimes they choose the community even without being aware of what exactly they wish to choose. Did I understand that right?
Yeah. So the abuser has made the choice for them. They've taken on the identity for themselves. And a lot of times, young men cannot go to their family and say these things because of deep-rooted shame. And so now the LGBTQ plus community becomes the only place that they can go to receive help, to receive care, to receive definition. And we haven't even begun to deal with abusers who give the young men that they abuse when they've given them STIs or STDs that they cannot get rid of. And so now they're forced to live with a shame. They're forced to live in secrecy. They're, now, and the people that get the shorter end of the stick, especially in other countries abroad, is the women who love these men.
It saddens me so much, Robert, that I have to really stop my tears, from listening to you, because these are such small children, who probably have no sense about their body and understanding of gender, sexuality, and all of that. You highlight that male survivors often remain silent, which I know, due to a certain need, of control or fear of judgment. And how can loved ones really balance giving space by creating a very safe environment that gently invites them to be vulnerable without being pressured to talk about it? And it's a very tight rope, that the loved one has to walk on so that, the male survivor feels comfortable to talk about. How does one navigate this, Robert?
Before I answer your question, I want to say this is something worth crying over, right? I want to say this to you and anyone who's listening. We have to feel this. We have to sense it. We have to sit in it, because this is not a them issue. This is an us issue. When I say 80 to 85% of boys and men in urban communities have experienced some form of this, like, that's not a them issue. This is an us issue. These are our sons. These are our husbands. Yeah. These are our nephews. These are our uncles. These are, our spiritual leaders. These are our community leaders who feel trapped within themselves, and they don't have the ability to get out. And so this is worth crying over. This is worth mourning over. And I'm going to answer your question. But before I answer that, there's another layer to this, that these boys and that these men, and especially in other contexts, even in America, where culturally it is expected to marry, it is expected to bear children. And so you are now then forced into, culturally or contextually, if you're forced into a marriage or a relationship, and they don't have the capacity to be faithful to their mate. So now they wind up being on their mates, or they are abusive to their mate, because now all of the trauma that they've experienced as boys, as teenagers, as young men, the person that gets destroyed in of that stint is his wife, is the daughter, is his children, because they're not dealing with a serial man. They may be dealing with an adult male, but they're not dealing with a whole man. And for some men, in one of the books that I wrote called Echoes, the stories of male survivors overcoming sexual trauma, it's in this book.
Cover again? Okay,
Yeah,
it's called Echoes.
It's Echoes. It's available on Audible, different platforms. One of the challenges, there was a story about a young man whose mother would go to work, and he had a father who was a known gang member. And so when the mother would go, the father would be abusive to the mother, so he would beat her up, hit her. And when she would go to work, because he was a gang leader, he was with the boys during the day. And so every day that the mom went out, he began to talk about how his stepfather would take him into the basement and would physically assault and molest him, rape him, and would whisper in his ear, "I'm going to make you like boys." And so what that young man, and that happened from 7 to almost 13 years old, and he begins to talk about his healing journey, or his journey into masculinity. He played sports. And so he talks about how his response was, in order to combat the voice of his abuser, he would then go on the sexual conquest with various types of women. So he would sleep and be sexually intimate with dozens of women to prove to himself that he was not, that he, in his words, not mine, that he was not a part of the LGBTQ plus community. And so he would do these things. And so these issues, when men experience it, they have different types of responses. But hypersexuality is actually a thing that we see more like, you're more likely to see in boys and men who experience abuse at younger ages. They have a hard time. They don't have a hard time being sexually, for some, don't have a hard time being sexually active, but they have a hard time being intimate, because a lot of times intimacy hurts for men. And so I wanted to add that there onto this conversation. But to answer your recent question, and if you don't mind, can you give it to me one more time? And I don't mind answering.
Yeah. I wanted to know about how is it that, the vulnerability, of holding that space for the person, especially for men, because, culturally, men are not taught to be vulnerable.
Yes.
You're supposed to be strong. You're supposed to be the protector. You're supposed to do everything that, makes you, seen as somebody in control. So, when you are becoming vulnerable with someone, how is it that I need to hold that sacred space? And this is for all our listeners, that if a child is coming back home and telling you about some sort of, abuse that they have faced, how does one hold that space?
So I would say, number one, if you're able to get a child or even a teenager to admit that this is happening, the first thing you have to realize is that you cannot make their experience about you. That experience, as much as you want to make it as a parent, and I'm talking specifically to parents,
yes,
you cannot make this about you. You cannot make this about your pride, your ego, or even your parenting at this moment. You have to be able to make the focus be on the child's experience. And so, and especially if they do come from a male, a healthy family background, because sexual abuse has no respect of person. But however, there is a sense to want to get even or to respond. And sometimes you can cause more harm to the child or the teenager or the young man if now you feel the need to respond to the abuser that hurt them. They still may have fear. They still may have deep shame. They still might have levels of guilt, or there is terminology that's called Stockholm syndrome, where
Yes.
they may even feel the need to protect or even love the person that's been abusing them. And that's very difficult. And so if you rush in to try to avenge or try to respond, you may be causing more harm. And so you have to make it about them. You have to realize that this is their journey, right? This is their journey, and you are accompanying them upon their journey. So allow them to move at their pace. Maybe they're not ready to give all the detail. Maybe they're not ready to release this, because for some cases it is very violent. Some are very violent, and so they already feel emasculated. And so when you make this about you and how they should be, and you're trying to tell them how they should be responding to this, you may be causing more harm. For a wife who may be finding out that her husband was abused, right? You have to become a safe space for him, meaning that a place where he can talk and not feel like he's going to be looked at as less than, that you're not going to dishonor or disrespect him or make him feel as if he is not a man, or he is not even masculine. If you then start withholding sex from him as a mate because of your response, that will cause more harm to him as a man. Or if you are a wife or a mate that has a husband that does not want to engage in sex, or has a hard time performing very sexual things with you, intimate things with you in the bedroom, you have to approach it with grace and understand that there's a level of disassociation with his body, and he may feel that his body has betrayed him. And so, they're being sexual or even getting aroused for him may be very triggering. The way you touch him, certain smells, certain things, it may be, and so the biggest mistake for a wife, is to think that his lack of sexual desire is a result of anything that you are doing, and it may not be. It just may undealt with trauma or situations that he's dealing with, and that he has to process. And what he needs you to do is to love him, is to allow him to speak, unapologetically and as raw as he needs to process, and also creating a space for him, whether he's an adult or he's a child, where he can get, and if you cannot help him, right, that you provide sometimes the space or the resources for him to get help on his, if he's not causing harm to others, right? Now, because there's a differentiating line that if he is causing harm to others, then yes, you need to, depending on what that harm is, if it's abuse or if it's domestic violence, or yes, get law enforcement involved, and you have to get some ultimatums. But if it's not causing harm to anyone else, and it's more of a reclusive and internal issue, it's providing the safe spaces for him to talk, to feel, be seen, be heard, be safe, and that he can get help. Because here's the other part, and I need to state this. I'm currently writing a book about this for women who are in relationships with men who have been sexually abused. It is not the wife's or the woman's role to heal her husband. That is not her role. Her role is not to take on all of the shame and all of the guilt and all of the trauma, because that's now secondary trauma, and that helps no one. Women have their own things to deal with that are outside of their mates. So it is her job to become a safe space and provide the resources and walk alongside him as to journey. You cannot take that journey for him. You cannot choose healing for him. That is something that he has to choose for himself, and you can empower him to continue to do such and understand what he may be dealing with and give him the grace to grow. But it is not your job to take on his pain.
Amazing, Robert. It's a huge it's an uphill task. It's not at all easy. So, Robert, what do you think you would like, shifts that you would really like to see, over the next decade? Because now slowly men are talking about, sexual abuse. And, for example, you've created this entire community. You're working towards it. You've written a book. What shifts do you want to see in public awareness, policy, and social attitude, towards male sexual trauma, in the next few decades? And I think the world is changing and people are opening up, Robert. But I'd really like to hear that from you.
So number one, legislation. I think on a legislative space that there needs to be some type of work in defining this issue as a real detriment to health for communities at large. When we talk about, and I've stood in prisons, I've stood in mosques and in churches and community organization, and the statistic is the same. 80 to 85% of boys and men in urban contexts have experienced some form of abuse. And unfortunately, socially and in a lot of social spaces, this is nowhere as an indicator of a detriment to health that calls men or influence people or men to perform self-sabotaging behavior. Which, like I said before, when you have broken men, you have broken boys become broken men who break communities. And so, but I also believe that if you do the work of healing men, if you heal a man, right, you heal a family. If you heal a family, you can heal a community. If you can heal a community, then we can heal the world. But we have to have the proper legislation in place, right? I think number two, we need to humanize. I would love to continue to see the humanization of lived experiences of male survivors. The truth is, culturally, in a lot of contexts, when we talk about male abuse, we automatically put it as it's kind of organized into the LGBTQ plus community. And that is not the truth. That is the farthest from the truth. And that's actually why a lot of men don't talk, because they're automatically put into I am a part of, you are now a part of this community because of this experience. Or even if they're complaining that it was at the hands of a woman. So number one, I would like to destigmatize that. And I hope that we see a cultural shift to realize that, hey, this is not a LGBTQ plus issue. This is a humanity issue. And hurt people. And if we provide the space where we're able to humanize this, heal can also heal people. And I think the last thing I will say to this is that we continue to see the rise of healthy families again, because when men have a safe space to heal, then you're able to reestablish some level of structural community norms, and communities are able to thrive. Families are able to thrive, and through that, I believe, on top of other layers of things I may want to talk about, we'll have a working playing field in order for the next generations to be able to have healthy context and not passing down trauma that we have not dealt with. Because I will say, when you do not deal with your trauma, it deals with you, and it will deal with children and your children.
Absolutely. Bang on. I completely agree with you on that. Unhealed families just continue the entire process, and it really takes the black sheep to break out of generational trauma that is passed on, for so long.
Yes.
It's a huge, it's a huge mountain to climb, But, Robert, what's one lie men often believe about manhood or fatherhood? And what's the truth that they need to hear instead?
Most men believe that vulnerability and transparency is weakness, when they realize that vulnerability and transparency is actually power. When you are no longer bullied by shame, when you are no longer bullied by secrets, right? That is when you start experiencing real freedom. And I say this all the time, male survivors, and any type of trauma. And because there is also something we have not talked about is domestic violence that men experience at the hands of women. This is very real. I can't tell you how many men sit in my office or that I coach or that I counsel who are being physically used, especially in America, because, and if a man hits a woman, automatically, typically, is going to jail for a long time in America. And so women, kind of take advantage of that. But anyway, the power of transparency and honesty, these are these are real virtues that allow men to take back their right to choose who they decide to be. And it gives them back their power that was stolen from them. And so whether they were abused or not, I say this all the time, men, you are only as free as your secrets. And many men are physically free without limitation, but they're emotionally, spiritually, psychologically bound. And when you walk in transparency, when you walk in truth, where you are, right? That's where real strength comes in, and you're able to show up as your unique self.
Thank you, Robert, for really taking out the time to be here with us today and sharing your story and wisdom. If you or someone has been affected by trauma or fatherlessness, remember, you're not alone, and healing is possible, especially now that you've heard this episode. To learn more about Robert's work and his Echoes collection, check out the links in the description. And if you think this conversation resonated with you, please share it with others who might need to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and join the conversation on social media. Together, we can break the silence and build a future where all survivors are heard. And I am honored to have you here with me today, Robert, and wish you all the best for this work that, needs to be lauded and needs to be heard and needs to be celebrated. And all the courage to you. You are a change maker, and it's been an honor to have you here with me today. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been such an honor.